It is Thompson to Clark, Double G here, solo. Brad and his family are enjoying vacation. Brad will be back next week, though. Next week, we may record in the middle of the week because of the holiday. So check for that more midweek than early in the week, like normal. And do a couple of quick updates here by myself until I bring on two guests for later in the show. So, first of all, the latest news that came out: Giants are on an off day before heading to, or actually, they've already head to Toronto to play a 3-gamer in Toronto. Kyle Harrison and Carson Wisenhunt will represent the Giants at the Futures game next month. So great for them. And who knows, we may even see one or both of them on the big club sooner than later. Luke Jackson went on the injured list with a back injury, and Ross Stripling rejoined the team after his long stint. I believe he pitched in San Jose and struck out like 9 guys in 3 innings or 4 innings or something crazy like that. So, and I also read that they were working on a little bit more of him being his delivery because he's so upright, and they saw some things in his delivery. Also, baby Yaz, Mike Yastrzemski went on the DL with a hammy issue. Late night, Lamont Wade, he's still dealing with a side issue. They have not put him on the injured list, so it looks like they're trying to get him to, just in a few days, day to day, try and work with him on that injury so that he is available. And last week, Giants went 5-2. Giants are hot. They're just a hot team right now. And they're not winning necessarily in one specific way or another. They're coming from behind. They're getting out in front and keeping the leads with smart bullpen play. Yesterday, they had a chance to win, but they had a couple of base running errors. And, with the youthful team comes the young, great energy, the just the ability to stay up. There's someone like Brandon Crawford. He's played so many games. I can't imagine that, he wakes up and goes, wow, I can't wait to play today. He probably realizes that he needs to sustain energy for the entire year. But you got these young kids who just look like they're like waking up and touching the ceiling before they get out and play. But, they're going to make some errors. Blake Sable made a base running error. He didn't pick up his third base coach on a play that I forget who was playing third base for the Diamondbacks. He ate the ball, basically. He stopped the ball, didn't go to the outfield, and Blake Sable thought it did. And instead, he should have picked up his third base coach, who could have told him what was going on. But he didn't, and he ran the Giants out of the inning. The Giants are 2.5 games back of the D-backs, so they came into that series down 3.5, what was it, 4.5? 3.5. They were down 3.5, and they left only 2.5 games back. And they're half a game in front of the Dodgers. The Dodgers are not going anywhere, folks. So I have a feeling, we're almost halfway into the season. This is going to be a pretty crazy NL West and wild card race, because now you get 3 wild cards. So I think for both races, they're going to be pretty interesting. The Giants just kind of have to hang where they are right now, and they're going to be involved. Now they could go off on a crazy run and distance themselves, but that's not likely. I don't think. Maybe it is, but they're just playing so hot right now. Anything can happen, I guess. And I read an interesting stat, which was that entering Sunday, the Giants were 24-17 against teams that were 500 or better, and only the Tampa Bay Rays had a better winning percentage against winning clubs. So that actually is a stat that is interesting because of the new scheduling, in that Major League Baseball has tried to make a much more even schedule. You're not playing your division so heavily, and thankfully for the Giants, because the NL West is rock solid this year. But Giants are also showing that when they play good teams, they're competing and they're winning ball games. So That is a good sign of a winning team, I think. And yeah, so the next 2 segments here, I'll introduce this next one. Jarrett Seidler from Baseball America is going to join me. And, whenever you get to talk to somebody who really knows baseball inside and out, knows a little bit about scouting, he's a prospect writer. Sorry, not Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus. Sorry, that was my fault. I have to buy a hat from Baseball Prospectus just because I flubbed and called them Baseball America. My bad, Jarrett. My bad. Don't worry, Jarrett won't even know because he's not going to hear the open. But Baseball Prospectus. He also hosts a podcast. He tweets a lot, and you can check him out on at JASEIDLER on Twitter. JA Seidler on Twitter. All right, that is the open here. That is the intro. Let's talk to Jarrett. Want to welcome Jarrett Seidler to the show, Baseball Prospectus senior writer. And this is a very heavy time for you because of all the things that are going on in your world. And I just saw earlier this morning, Kyle Harrison and Carson Wisenhunt for the Giants they've been selected to the Futures game.
Yeah.
And I think the current Giant fan base right now, there's been some payoff for us. I'll include myself, because when Farhan Zaidi took the reins, the idea was we're following this blueprint that he's been a part of for these different teams. And it is to draft very well and to grow these prospects very well. And I think the first 3 years into his reign, Giants fans were like, where is it? What's happening? It's sort of like, are you a Ted Lasso fan?
I am, yes.
So it's like the Wonder Kid, right? It's he, that Farhan come in and just this reputation of prospects, and we're gonna have good drafts, and it didn't happen. Now, some of that was he also took over for the previous couple drafts, and Joey Bart was in that draft, and Joey Bart kind of gets. He shouldn't be a part of the Zaidi regime, but he kind of gets put in that category. And he's having a horrendous season. I saw his numbers in AAA, and he's swinging through everything. Yeah. But now we're starting to see some returns on Farhan's investments, and 3 main prospects, and not even the Giants' tippy top prospects, have come up to the big club and are part of what I like to call sort of Hum Baby 2.0, which is in the late 80s, the Giants became a very fun team based off of the backs of Will Clark and Robbie Thompson and Matt Williams and guys like that who came up through the farm system. So this is kind of a little bit of a recreation of that, though I don't know that anybody is as great of a prospect as Will Clark was in 1980, in 1985, 1986. But what have you thought about? Did you think they were going to bring or have to bring multiple guys up at the same time? It seems like you would maybe want one because now your team is so rookie heavy in major key positions on the field. But what do you think about what they've done so far with Matos and Bailey and Casey Schmitt?
So I think Schmitt, it was reasonable to expect he was going to be up this season. He had a nice year last year. He ranked on our top 101 prospects. He has that great defensive ability. He's just a stellar defensive third baseman. Good enough that he can fill in a shortstop. I know he's not hitting a lot right now, but he's hitting okay-ish.
Yeah, they figured out that he's chases, so they're like, oh, we're not throwing you strikes anymore.
That's kind of an interesting. A lot of the top Giants prospects have chase issues, just too much swing and miss outside the zone. And I think they might be specifically targeting guys with chase issues, because one of the more modern player development ideas is you take the guys that make a lot of contact and you take a lot of the guys that do a lot of damage on contact, and you can teach them better swing decisions. You can teach them to chase outside the zone less, to chase in the shadow zone a little bit less, to just swing less in general. So you've got guys that's true for Schmitt. It's definitely true for Matos. It's true for a lesser extent with Patrick Bailey as well. So that's like on the hitting side, their kind of archetype is hitters that make a lot of contact and drive the ball in the air when they do. And on the pitching side, they've gotten really into guys with like slightly funky deliveries. One of the things we've learned about pitching in the last few years is that those like almost like the Chris Salish, like low three-quarter sidearm type arm slots, which prior to the last 10 years, those guys almost all ended up in relief. Those guys are starting to start now, and that describes Wisenhunt, that describes Harrison, that describes some other pitchers they've taken that have worked out a little less well. But they've so they brought these three guys up, and Schmitt, I think, is on a relatively normal timetable. Bailey and Matos were both coming off awful seasons last year.
Yes.
Bailey basically hadn't hit since he got drafted, like at all. He looked, I'm sure you guys were making Joey Bart jokes about him.
Oh, yeah.
It looked like the same thing.
Well, the one caveat there, though, is they said that his defense was good enough already, and it was just a hit thing. And if we go back 20 years, you remember JT Snow.
I do.
Yeah. JT Snow came to the Giants as a switch hitter, and he switch hit for his career, but he was so poor as a right-handed hitter later in his career, they just stopped having him hit against lefties. And so we sort of heard the same thing about Bailey in that his right-handed swing was going to be the problem, but it's kind of flipped since he got in the majors. Like I think he's hit more home runs right-handed so far in his big league stay than even left-handed.
Yeah, it's kind of a tiny sample. He's also like he's making a lot more contact and harder contact than he made really at any level of the minors. I know the major league stats are a lot easier to find than the minor league stats, but we have some availability to get the minor league stats on like background. And over his first, I think he's got like 100, 110 plate appearances. He's making a lot of contact. He's making a lot of hard contact. He's not really walking too much, so he's not really getting on base. But those are the types of things that you wanted to see from him out of college. This guy was the top half of the first round draft pick. A college catcher, was one of the best hitters in college baseball, and then just kind of got into a pro ball and didn't hit the ball all that hard, didn't make a whole lot of contact. There's John Sickles, who was a top prospect writer like decades ago, basically is like the patron saint of like internet prospect guys. Great guy too. He's stopped writing a few years ago. He had some, I think he had like a traumatic brain injury or something. It was very sad. He's still around though. Great guy. He coined a term called young catcher offensive stagnation syndrome, which is that catchers in particular, due to the rigors of the position and the rigors of development and just taking a beating back there, tend to have really weird offensive paths where they just kind of stagnate for a couple of seasons, and then sometimes it gets together later. Their paths tend to be much less linear than your outfielder or your infielder, just because of the nature of the catching position. I think that might have described what Bailey looked like in the minors for the last couple of years. It just kind of stagnated, and now he's just kind of there. And I don't think he's actually like a 300 hitter with like a 500 slugging percentage, but he looks like a starting catcher now. And that's,
and they don't put a lot of pressure on him. He's hitting lower in the order. He's not having to hit 3, 4, 5. He's they're doing that okay with him because he's getting some timely hits, and he's looking smart in certain situations because of how they're using him. So I don't think there's any pressure for him. But being that you said the prospect, he was in the upper half there of the draft, there was a little bit of pressure on him, and I think there was more pressure on him when Joey Bart started playing so poorly. And because you're like, okay, like what do we do? Well, we have this other kid who is down there, and the Giants talked about, well, you just draft the best player. We thought the catcher was the best player, and because fans were like, why do we have 2 catchers in the last 3 drafts? And this is why.
Yeah, when he was drafted, people were genuinely curious, like what other position is he going to end up playing? Is he going to play in third base, right field, somewhere like that, first base? Are you going to DHing one of them? Those tend to be problems that sort itself out, especially with catchers, because you need a lot of them to end up with one good starter. It's just a position where there's so much so much stagnation. You look at the Dodgers just keep drafting and developing catchers, even though they have Will Smith, who's probably the best catcher in baseball now, not to mention the hated Dodgers on here. But, it's always a position that you want to have.
An excellent player.
Yeah, he keeps getting better, too. Like, he's eliminated his swing and miss this year. It's just wild. But, yeah, it's a position where you need to get – you need to have inventory of several high-end prospects to hope you end up with one good starter, which it looks like Bailey has a shot to be. And then Luis Matos, who's the third guy here, is just we had him in the top 50 prospects in baseball before the 2022 season. He looked like he was going to be a star, and pretty quickly, kind of a guy that's able to do anything. Again, has some chase outside the zone problems. He had a quad injury early in the 2022 season, and his season just never got started.
Yeah.
He just didn't hit anything. He was almost so bad that you wanted to throw it out just because it couldn't possibly be a representative performance. And that's basically what happened. I mean, he came back. He makes an extraordinary amount of contact. He's one of the best. He has one of the best when he's healthy and right, which he has been this season. He has one of the best bat to ball abilities of any prospect. And now that he's in the major leagues, he's running, 89% in zone contact rate, which is high. So he's putting the bat on the ball all the time, and he's capable of driving it in the air. He really hasn't done that in the majors yet, but he's got the same issue where he's just chasing a whole lot. I know he had that really cool home run. He had his first home run the other night. It was a really cool moment. That guy's got a chance to be a star. He also plays a really, really nice center field too.
Yeah.
He's just kind of got everything except he needs to chase a little less. And the early returns on him this year, he is chasing less than he did. So he's not really hitting the ball very hard yet, but he's on to the majors a little bit. He's, that's going to come. But this was a guy that, I don't think there was really much thought coming into the season that he was even in the picture.
Yeah.
Just because he was just awful last year. He was awful in high A. It wasn't like he was awful in triple A. He's awful 2 levels below the majors. The guy hit 210 last year in the low minors, and now all of a sudden we're talking 2.5 months of baseball later, and he's in the majors and putting up a perfectly credible offensive performance, which is really a credit to him. And it's also a credit to the player development at stake here, which I think this is the 4th season as IAD. Is that the 3rd or the 4th? Somewhere in there.
I think it's the 4th.
Yeah, I think it's the 4th. It takes that long to actually turn over this stuff and get your guys in place. Usually it takes by the time a general manager is hired over the winter, the contracts for the scouting and player development staff for the next year have already kind of been settled. So you're not really turning over and getting your guys in place until the 2nd season. And then after that, you've got to get your processes and your coaches and your instruction and all that stuff in place. You got to start actually drafting the guys. This tends to lag by 4 or 5 seasons until you actually see the results of a super process-oriented team, especially kind of coming from where the Giants came from. Now, look, Brian Sabian's one of the all-time great baseball executives, but he just had no interest in this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, God bless him, he won 3 World Series there, and he was phenomenal at the old school kind of scout and, develop under the old ways. That doesn't really work in 2023 anymore. We know too much other stuff. But, starting from a lower spot on the infrastructure, you've got to get all of the scouting, the analytics, the player development, personnel in place, and then you've got to create your processes. And that's still going to take a couple of years from there for this stuff to actually start showing up. They took Carson Wisenhunt, you mentioned, was a kid they took in the 2nd round last year. He had drug suspension in college, came into the season as one of the top pitching prospects, did not pitch particularly well in the Cape Cod League, which was the only place he pitched that year. They took a shot on him in the late 2nd round, and he's probably going to make our midseason 50. He looks like one of the best left-handed pitching prospects in the game now, pretty much out of nowhere. Right behind Kyle Harrison, who's also one of the best left-handed pitching prospects in the game. And, I assume is probably going to be up pretty soon, joining the 3 other guys. He's had some walk problems in AAA, and it's kind of a weird profile because he's like super fastball dominant from that kind of like funky arm action. But hey, that's actually working these days for pitchers. So yeah, I mean, this is a significant youth movement. It's kind of got a lot of guys with the same traits, and they're still acquiring a lot of those guys with the same traits as they move on. And, you know, it's hard because the Dodgers in the same division are basically doing the same thing. They have like an 8-year head start and more money. So you're always going to have kind of that weird comparison point. But, you know, the Giants are getting there. I would certainly consider the Giants, you know, they're moving into like that top 8 to 10 of teams in terms of player development, drafting, scouting, which is a breakthrough from where they were previously. They were probably mid-pack previously.
So the funny thing about Wisenhunt is, so his was a PED failure, right?
I believe so. I don't know if that was ever officially announced because it was a college thing, but yeah.
So I think it was a PED failure. You know who else had a PED failure in the minors? Was Logan Webb.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you kind of
Barry Bonds is like, don't be blaming me, guys. This has nothing to do with me. So
it's kind of weird how little that's become stigma. Like nobody ever mentions that like Starling Marte had a PED failure anymore. Like the only guy who gets tagged with it now is Tatis for whatever reason.
My favorite one, my favorite one of all time was Manny Ramirez, who didn't get caught for actual testosterone. He got caught because he had to reverse the testosterone to restart it.
Yes.
So he was taking a drug that dudes don't necessarily take.
Yes.
And so it kind of reversed it for him. But that's my favorite one because he didn't get caught for the actual steroids. He got caught for trying to get off of the actual steroids. So, a couple other things with some of the other, obviously, you know, Marco Luciano has been the guy for this franchise as far as who is next. Now, he was injured last year.
Yeah.
He came into this season and they had to give him some time off because I don't think he was fully recovered. And he has struggled. He's had some streaks of like just hitting the hell out of the ball and then streaks of like not hitting very well. Like when you see somebody like that, where you're like, okay, you know, 3 years ago, this guy had, you know, X, Y, and Z written all over him. And now as he grows through the system, he's starting to struggle. But then, you know, the injury is also part of it. How do you weigh the injury with guys like Luciano? Because back injury doesn't sound good for like a young, big, you know, tall kid who's supposed to be playing shortstop or third base eventually.
That cuts both ways, right? Because it's an excuse for the performance, and it's a legitimate, valid excuse as to why he maybe hasn't been so good lately, why he struggled. But it's also, we're now talking about almost a year of like recurring back problems, which the average listener of your podcast, I'm guessing, is probably in like their 30s or older, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Once you start getting the back pain, it doesn't go away, right? Like it's just kind of, once the back problems start, they just keep recurring.
You search up like Pilates, and you like stretching, and
So like chronic back problems that start affecting the performance are a pretty significant red flag when evaluating the future potential. Luciano's still an interesting prospect. He was kind of a weird case, so to speak, event initially, because he was one of the guys where a lot of his best exploits were like stuff at like the alternate site during the pandemic. Like it wasn't in like actual game competition. So he kind of just, and he never really, until the last maybe years, so actually probably even less, until the back injury started, he hadn't really done anything to dissuade us from continuing to rank him highly. But it was always like one of those rankings where he was a level below the top tier guys. Like he was in like the second tier of prospects, because he had never really dominated a level in the way that you'd hope. There's always a little more swing and miss, a little less hit tool. So it's kind of like a power-based profile. And then the back injuries start. He's an unclear fit defensively. I think probably a third baseman eventually. So he's kind of getting, he's not like totally getting passed up. He's still probably the third or fourth best prospect in the system, pending who they draft. But, I think Harrison's pretty clearly a better prospect at this point. I think Wisenhunt's probably a better prospect at this point. So he's still in the mix. Like if we ran, I don't know that he's going to make the midseason 50. Is like in the mix for like the bottom few spots, just kind of based on what he's done previously and based on the amount of damage he can do. Because when this guy gets a hold of it, he puts up like those, 113, 114, 115 exit velocities when he really hits it. Like he is capable of hitting the ball that hard. And he's still capable of hitting the ball that hard. There's just less certainty that he's actually going to hit it often enough to be too much of an issue. It sucks. I hate talking about guys that get hurt and start to have skill degradation probably as a result of the injury, because it sucks.
Now, the Giants have this interesting set of outfield prospects. In most conversations, one is right next to the other in Grant McCray and Vaughn Brown. Now, Vaughn Brown, he is already 25 and he's still only in Double-A. So there's always a question. And, some of the stuff with the pandemic, I know that threw a lot of guys out of whack. But, the Giants with Matos, I think, when we were talking about, Brad and I were talking about like Giants prospects who actually became starting outfield players. Like you had to go back, for like a consistent player. Like we were trying to figure, we was like Chili Davis in 1983 or something like that. It was like some crazy stat, right? That they just didn't have any homegrown outfielders. Now, Matos is up and, crossing my fingers that, but he's still so young. He's 21 years old.
Yeah.
But these are the next two guys on the list of most of the lists that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And they're, more speedy. They're not these giant home run hitters. They're more gap power. And what do you think about these two guys as far as, could the Giants, in the next 2 years, get another guy come up and play for the big team in the outfield spots?
I think they've got a chance. We were higher on McCray. I think we might have been higher on Brown coming into this season. But both of them were in our top 10. They've both kind of, they've had like okay seasons, and they're not particularly young for the levels that they're playing at.
Yeah, Brown's not really hitting yet.
Yeah,
I think he also had some. He's had injury issues. I think last year, like he made the jump and then like immediately got injured. And Grant McCray too. They're both hitting in the low 200s. So neither guy is really taking the next step.
Right. These are both guys kind of in the vein of what we were talking about earlier, where it's more damage on contact, but are they going to make enough contact? Are they going to walk enough? Are they going to, not be overmatched by high minors pitching? Because the high minors are kind of where that sort of thing happens. The Giants have taken other than Matos, who was kind of a need at the major league level, the Giants actually have taken a pretty conservative promotional tack with their hitting prospects in particular, which is actually pretty common for more analytical teams. There's an idea that you want to get your prospects, even if they're college guys, even if they're 4-year college guys as opposed to 3-year college guys. You want to get them hundreds of plate appearances at every level. You want to get them, 400 plate appearances in the low minors, and then you want to get them 600 plate appearances in the high minors. And if you start ticking that off, you can end up with a 25-year-old at Double-A because he just hasn't hit the developmental benchmarks yet. Brown, I think, was a senior sign, if I recall correctly, that signed for a relatively low amount of money. So if you're starting your pro career at 22, your first full season 23, and they're not promoting you like super duper fast, you're going to end up being that in the minors. They're kind of like they're interesting, interesting kind of power speed type combos. But yeah, I mean, they're not. Neither one of those guys right now clearly projects as a major league regular. What I will say, and my friend Rob Orr at BP has written about this specifically with the Giants. The Giants have gotten very good at maximizing individual traits and kind of running these flawed type of players out in like these wacky platoon roles that aren't always left-right platoons. Sometimes it's like whether the pitcher has good fastball carry or stuff like that, platooning based on pitch types. And the Giants seem to be, if not the top team at doing that, then one of the top teams. And guys like Brown and McRae are the types of prospects that they might be able to get more out of in a 300 or 400 plate appearance role than say, I'm a Mets fan. Buck Showalter's at best going to platoon these guys based on lefty righty. And, right. Yeah. So, kind of they're well positioned to maximize the hitting abilities that these guys do end up providing at the major league level, even if they're not like full regulars.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it is, the way that the Giants use their roster, there's guys who are having to play, new positions even without a lot of experience in the majors. Like Brett Wisely has had to come up and play center field a little bit for them, and he's not, he's been a middle infielder for his career. So they're trying to find interesting ways, and at the same time minimize at least some of the risk of putting these guys in spots that they're not comfortable with. But that is an interesting idea. I never, you don't really think of it that way, but yeah, the answer could be, McRae could be a big leaguer, but he's not. He's going to be a big leaguer in the way of how they use, some of their guys in like in the lefty righty situations where you get 400 plate appearances instead of 600. That's an interesting way to look at it. Okay, last thing I want to ask you about. So last year, the Giants drafted Reggie Crawford to, I guess, be a two-way player. I'm still sort of unsure about the realistic.
He's a pitcher. Yeah, he's a pitcher.
That's what it seems like. But then you hear them talk, and I'm sure some of it is because he probably wants to do it more than they may want to allow him. But that he has actually hit in games and such, and I just didn't know how realistic that would be for somebody like him.
So there's no harm in him doing it at this level, right? Like he was on Tommy John rehab, so I think they let him DH like a handful of games. And he was like a interesting hitting prospect. He was like a couple rounds lower as a hitting prospect than a pitching prospect. That's not uncommon. Paul Skeens from LSU coming into the season was a two-way player at Air Force for a couple of years, and he was, he's going to go in the top 2 picks almost certainly as a pitcher. And as a hitting prospect, he was like a late first, early second round type guy. So they basically confiscated his bat. He's just a pitcher now. But you have to buy in from the player to do that. They've got him mostly focused on pitching. He's popped up a little bit lately. They let him hit a little bit. I don't think him as a two-way player is a particularly serious proposition. I think he's basically just going to be a pitcher, but there's no harm in letting him hit for a while. The Reds let Hunter Green hit for a while, and he was the number 2 overall draft pick, and it's obviously a very good major league pitcher. And he was drafted as a two-way, and he hit for I think the first season, and then it was just like, you're actually a pitcher.
Yeah, you throw 103 miles an hour, just go take the bump.
Yeah, just fascinating guy. That guy, he's fascinating pitcher, fascinating guy.
Hey, thank you for helping me out this week. No Brad means that I tried to, I wanted to talk to some folks who I haven't been able to talk to in a little bit, you being one of them. And it was a lot of fun. It's great because with the way the internet works, you and I meet not even related to baseball.
Yep.
And yet we can circle back and do this and talk about baseball. So it's fascinating how you can network and meet with people. So I really appreciate you making the time. You're a busy dude. But how can people support you? You know what I'm going to do? I think I'm going to buy you guys have a store, right? I think I'm going to buy a hat. So I'm always looking for more hats to wear on podcasts just to change it up. I think I'm going to buy a Baseball Prospectus hat.
We do have some cool hats on there. My Twitter's at JA Seidler, Seidler. As Garrett can attest to, my Twitter's an absolute disaster. I just randomly rant about everything on the planet. So I don't actually suggest that people follow me there. I think we call it a Mets adjacent podcast with my friend Jeffrey Paranastro, who's the lead prospect writer at BP. We do that weekly. It's called For All You Kids Out There. We have a Patreon that has some supporters, I think.
And that's a hard business, huh? The Patreon's a hard business.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like there. It's like almost like we use it like a tip jar kind of thing.
Yeah. That's totally fine to do that too.
Yeah. So that podcast is also a disaster. We regularly go like 2-3 hours just talking about absolutely nothing and everything on the planet. It's basically just like our weekly BS sessions that we'd have anyway on the phone.
Yeah.
And we're just recording them. So we talk Mets baseball at large, talk a little wrestling occasionally. Just random. Jeffrey talks about European soccer occasionally. It's just a complete. I'm sure we'll talk about Forbidden Door this week.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My rating is 99.9% at Baseball Prospectus. I have not been doing a lot recently because we're gearing up for our draft top 25 and our midseason top 50, both of which will be out in the next 3-ish weeks. So we're kind of just trying to get everything together to do rankings, and I'll have some supporting material with that. But Baseball Prospectus, we got a ton of great writers over there. We've got great prospect content. We have at least one 10-pack every week where we have 10 scouting reports. We have very thorough coverage of the Giant system because we have several people there on the West Coast, including Mark DeLucci, who's Mark writes about Giants prospects for us, so occasionally some other prospects. And Mark's great. I think he's one of the best up-and-coming baseball writers around. So we have a lot of coverage of the Giants system just because we have a lot of people at their affiliates. So we pretty frequently have Giant scouting reports on there too.
Awesome. No, that's great. So thanks again for doing this. Go support Jarrett. Like I said, I think I'm gonna buy a hat from the shop there. The next segment we will preview Giants and Toronto Blue Jays. All right, and to wrap this show up, I wanted to bring on a good friend of mine who I don't get to talk real sports. Actually, we do get to talk MMA, so I take that back. But Paul Fontaine, he does a couple of podcasts for the Fight Game Media Network, one on professional wrestling and one on mixed martial arts. But we're going to talk about another of his passions, which is the Blue Jays, because he watches just about more baseball than anybody I know. What's up, man?
Not much. It's off day today, so I feel like I got all the time in the world. I literally watch every single game. Now, if it's a blowout, I might skip through the opposing teams at bat, because I usually watch on a delay. But I will watch every single at bat for the Blue Jays, every game.
That's good, because I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you about some of these players.
Sure, I'm ready with some stats and some probable pitchers and all that stuff. I think I'm prepared for anything you ask me.
So the Giants, they head to Toronto starting Tuesday, and there's a 3-game series. So Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night, and then you guys. Then I think then do the Red Sox come into town? Something like that?
Yeah, next weekend. The Canada Day weekend, big series.
The Giants are playing some really good baseball.
Do you guys have the best record in MLB since like May 15th or something like that?
Yeah, they're on like a 111 game win pace for a season if you excluded the first month or whatever. But a formidable opponent for the Blue Jays. The Giants and the Blue Jays, record-wise, not too dissimilar. You guys are in 4th place in the AL East, which says a lot to division in which you play in, because Tampa started so hot and they're still winning every 2 out of 3 games. Baltimore, surprisingly to some, maybe not so much to others, Baltimore is still playing really good baseball. And then the Yankees are just going to hang around. They're a good franchise. They have good talent. But you guys are only half a game behind the Yankees. And, so this is where the third wild card comes in. I imagine that you guys will be fighting for that third wild card pretty much down to the end of the season. But overall, like, what would your outlook be with, we're almost are we halfway done with the season? We're almost halfway done.
78 games, I think. The general consensus is that people are pretty disappointed with the Blue Jays so far. And I think a lot of that has to do with their record in the AL East. I don't have it up in front of me right now, but the last time I remember I saw it, I think they were like 10 games under 500 against AL East opponents. And then against the rest of baseball, they're like 16 games over. I think they have the second best record in Major League Baseball against non-divisional opponents. And they have the third worst record against divisional opponents. So, as you mentioned, it's just a murderer's row division that they're in. The Orioles, they came on last year. They were like right in a playoff hunt until about a month left in the season, and then they kind of fell off. And this year they're just kind of picking up from there. Adley Rutschman is just like,
and they have prospects that are coming up still, and their
bullpen is lights out. The last 2 innings, Colon and Batista, I think it is. So that's a team I just hate facing. And then the Blue Jays just can't beat Tampa. Like, they've never, they go down to Tampa and they lose. It doesn't matter if the Rays suck, they lose. And especially now when they win, like, they're great. But I'm really looking forward to this series. Oakland was just in Toronto,
and you get to beat up on the A's a little bit.
Yeah. We should have won the whole series. They gave up a 9th inning home run in the first game, and they lost that game, but they won the last 2. Yesterday was 12-1. Vlad Guerrero is finally out of his slump. He got his first home run at Rogers Center on Friday. Like, for the whole season. Like, it's ridiculous.
So he's got 10 home runs on the road and 1 home run at home.
I think he's up to 11 now, because he got another one yesterday.
Okay.
So, but and like Danny Jansen, who's like their backup catcher, had the same amount of home runs as him. I think Vlad pulled ahead now, but he's still, like, he's putting up Vladdy numbers. He's going to end up with 25 to 30 home runs and 100 RBIs. So he's fine. Bo Bichette's lights out.
That's the one that stands out when you look at the numbers for the Blue Jays. Bo Bichette's season, he's going to make the All-Star team.
Oh yeah, he's he's got the most hits in MLB over the last 3 years. I think he's led the American League the last 2 years before this, and he's leading again this year. Because he's usually second. Springer leads off, but Bichette's usually second in the lineup, and he doesn't walk, so he's like, just a hit
for his batting average. The on base isn't necessarily too much higher, but but still, when you can hit 320, you don't really need to walk that much because you're getting on base by just
the standard rule is you take 60 points off the on base, and that's like your true batting average. But I don't think that fits for Bichette, because he's like a machine. What you want to watch for him, if you guys, your Giants fans haven't seen him, he hits to the opposite field like more than anyone in baseball. I think over half his hits are to the opposite field this season. So that's something to watch out for.
So I want to talk about 2 old friends.
I see one right there.
Giants. One of those old friends, I believe, is starting Tuesday. So this podcast will be up Tuesday morning. Video will be up Monday night. Kevin Gausman. Now, when you and I were talking about Kevin Gausman last year, my read on Gausman was he's going to have a lights out first half, and the second half he's going to get a little tired. He's going to falter. He didn't really falter that much last year. I thought he pitched pretty consistently all season, and then he's having another really good first half. So good for Gausman. That's one of the things that Giants fans, with this Farhan Zaidi regime, the idea is like they don't really give deals to starting pitchers, like long deals to starting pitchers. And Gausman's whole point about leaving was that the Giants didn't even offer him a contract. And I think the consensus with Giants fans is that they knew that, if you could get a multi-year deal, Giants weren't going to offer you one, so you might as well just go and take it. So I don't think there's there's no frustration with Giants fans over Gossman getting the money that he got, because that's what you're there for. You're there to build up this resume so that you can make some money in your late 20s, early 30s, and that's exactly what he did. And he's pitching like an ace. He's doing really well for you guys. So that is something that I sort of expected it to not work out as well, but man, he's been great for you guys.
Yeah, I think he's leading the American League in strikeouts, 7-3. He's got two of the three most pitches of any player, like any game. He's hit like 100, over 120 a couple times. So I know you say that's probably going to come back and bite him in the ass later in the season, but so far so good. Last season he had a great season, and then like in the playoffs, the deciding game, Jays were up 8-1, and they pulled him with the bases loaded in the 6th, and then the reliever just poured gas on the fire, and they ended up blowing the lead. But a lot of people are really pissed off that they should have kept him in, and they just come back this year, and he's been strong, and they've needed it because Alek Manoah, he just fell apart, and he's like in Dunedin right now, trying to find his pitching arm. But we got our three best pitchers, I think, are coming up in this series. Chris Bassett and Jose Berrios, who's making a comeback. He had a real off year last year, but he's real strong this year. He 7 or 8 innings in his last start, I think, and only gave up 2 hits. So yeah, he's been strong. And even Yosuke Kikuchi has been good. Last night
you guys have 4 starters.
Yeah,
all have started 16 games, which shows the consistency there. And then Manoah had started 13, but
and Trevor Richards kind of comes in and pitches, like 4 innings, and then they turn it over to the bullpen during Manoah's start. Although there's talk that he might be back mid July. Things are going well in Dunedin, and even Hyunjin Ryu is he's looking to come back. Everyone thought he was going to be done because he had Tommy John last year, but he's coming along, and they're expecting him in August. So they may have 6 starters.
So the Giants are scheduled to start an opener on Tuesday. So they'll have a short arm followed by a middle innings guy, and try and handle the Blue Jays that way. But then you guys do get I think Logan Webb, who's the Giants' best starter. I think he starts Wednesday, and then TBD for both currently for Thursday, as far as I can tell. But the other person I wanted to talk about, the old captain. What does he call himself this year? What is
the MVP?
Yeah, is that what he calls himself? Okay.
Yeah. The players chant MVP every time he goes back to the dugout. He had the great line when he was second in the DH voting for the All-Star game, and he says that's how you know fans are stuffing the ballot box because I'm not number 1.
I was wondering how he was going to play, because there was no more polarizing player for the Giants than Brandon Belt in this run of championships, and I'll tell you why. So Brandon Belt, he was, he wasn't a number 1 pick. I think he was maybe a 2nd or 3rd round or 4th round pick, but he came up with Brandon Crawford, early 2000s, and so he's part of this, this rejuvenation of, the late sort of the post Barry Bonds year. So Lincecum and Madison Bumgarner. Brandon Belt is part of that. He was not on the very first World Series team, but he was on the next 2. And the fans did not like essentially his batting eye, because he takes a lot of pitches, strikes out a lot, walks a lot. And so, a lot of fans are like, why is he taking this called third strike? What the hell? Why is he so inconsistent? He's just a streaky guy. He's just like, when he's on, you can't get him out. And when he's off, he cannot even make contact with a fastball. Like, it's kind of crazy how streaky he is. So to Giants fans, that they want Will the Thrill. They want that consistency of the clutch guy who's up and you can depend on him. And so they kind of put Belt into Will's shoes, and that's just not who Brandon is. And I sent you a stat the other day.
Yeah.
Most games started by first baseman in San Francisco Giants history. Brandon Belt's number 2 behind Willie McCovey.
I was shocked.
Which shows you the longevity. So I was just interested to see how he would play because he does have this goofy, dry wit personality. And the fans who loved Belt, they really did love him. But he was also a slight turnoff to the fans who were frustrated by his inconsistencies. And so, when I see the stuff about the MVP, I just kind of wonder, okay, how many of these Blue Jays fans are really rolling their eyes and how many of them are really leaning into the fun of it?
I think it's more the former with him. I don't think it's quite caught on yet because the Jays have their favorites. Obviously, Vlad and Bo, are going to be the big favorites. And Springer is he's got that electric personality. And when he gets a hit, he just brings the whole team on. And Kevin Kiermaier is a real fan favorite, like just, with the spectacular catches and timely hits and stuff like that. But Belt is like low key, like I was just looking at his stats and like, it's crazy. Like you mentioned the strikeouts.
Yeah.
And he's 72.
He's struck out a lot already.
He leads the team. No, he's second on the team in strikeouts, even though he's only got half the at-bats of some of the regulars. But yet his OPS is almost 800.
Yep.
And he's got the highest on base percentage of anyone on the team with more than 150 at-bats. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, he's got that eye and he'll take a call, third strike if he thinks it's out. And usually, I don't know how accurate those little boxes they put on the screen are, but he's usually right.
Yeah.
But sometimes they don't give him the call. But he'll take those close pitches and okay, I struck out. And he doesn't really bitch about it. Like he just goes back and not like a lot of players. So I really like him a lot. And he's been hurt a couple times. So he's only played about 2/3 of the games, I guess. But he gives Vladdy a day off at first about twice a week. And then he DHs him and Kirk will split the DH. Alejandro Kirk will split the DH's spot when Vladdy's playing first. So
yeah, there will be a time. I don't know when it will be, but he will all of a sudden hit 7 home runs in 3 weeks.
He's had a couple stretches like that, like where he hit like 500 for I think for 3 weeks or something like that. With a couple home runs and like 10 RBIs or something. So, but with the Jays, they just they do everything by the book. So it doesn't matter how hot you are. If you're scheduled to be off that day, you're off. They don't play by feel. They got some computer in the front office.
The analytics.
Absolutely. Yeah. John Schneider is the manager and he's a puppet. But it works for them.
So Belt, I wonder, as these guys get a little bit older and you have this universal DH, I do wonder how many teams he's just going to bounce to all these different teams until the end of his career. But the injury thing is going to be an issue with him. He's got the bulky knee. He had also some of the worst luck with injuries. He got hit on the side of the head in warm-ups. Like he wasn't looking and someone threw a ball at him and blasted him the side of the head. So he's had concussion issues for that. But I'm such a fan of his. I leaned into the goofiness and I leaned into a lot of the hate from the fans. And, people who know me know that I have a bunch of graphics of him, in different poses and stuff.
You posted those. I got a kick out of that. But tell if you actually were into it or if you were just doing it ironically. But
it kind of started ironically, but there's the hardcore Belt fans. They're really into him, and I'm just a fan. I always
hopefully he ends up going back there. From what you're saying, it sounds like that would be fun. Like maybe for his last season, just play 30 games or something and retire as a Giant.
Yeah, I mean it'd be nice to have that, but
then he'll go into the Hall of Fame.
The Giants will probably put him on their wall,
Oh yeah,
because
second most games at first base, and that team's been around for over 100 years.
Well, here's the discussion. What the discussion really is about who's going to get a statue, because the Giants have statues of Mays, McCovey, Cepeda, Marichal, Gaylord Perry. There might be one other that
we talked about this when I was in San Francisco, didn't we?
Yeah. So
Lincecum?
you got there's Lincecum.
Yeah.
There's Bonds.
Well, Bonds should get one, but
there's Matt Cain, and there's Brandon Crawford, who's probably in his last season. So there are guys like that where you're like, who gets the statue and who doesn't? Because coming out of the 3 championships, I don't think anybody is going to get into the Hall of Fame until Buster Posey, and he will obviously get a statue.
Yeah.
But
who's your big guy? Who's your big guy now? Like, is it like Crawford?
No, Crawford is really struggling. Unfortunately, he's having a really poor season. He actually got benched for a rookie because the rookie was hot. I would say the Giants' best player is probably someone who's a little under the radar, I think, to the national media. I would say their 2 best players, at least offensively, are under the radar to the national media. J.D. Davis, who plays third base, and Thairo Estrada, who plays second base. Thairo Estrada is a former Mets farmhand, and I think he was out of options, and the Mets just wanted to get something for him rather than DFA him, so they traded him to the Giants, and Thairo has been great. Thairo, he's tapered off a little bit, but at one point, I thought he would be, one of the guys. If the Giants get more than one to the All-Star game, because I think Camilo Duvall is probably going to make the team just because he's pretty good closer. But Thairo would be the other one that I thought, but his batting average has come down a little bit. But they have Michael Conforto, who they picked up, and the Giants famously have these contracts where it's like a 1-and-1. It's like Conforto missed all of last season because he has arm problems, and so they signed him to a 2-year deal. But what it really is it's a 1-and-1. So he's playing this year, and then next year he can opt out. So if he has a good season, he's opting out. And if he has a crappy season, he's going to opt in. So the fans don't really win on this one.
So it's kind of like what you were saying about Gausman, like the same kind of thing, right? Like you play well to get a contract somewhere else.
That was what it was for Gausman for sure.
Yeah.
But the thing about the Giants is, and what is exciting about this team is the young players. Yeah. They have, unfortunately, their highest draft pick in quite some time was Joey Bart a few years back, and he's just not developed, and he's not even on this team. They drafted another catcher 2 years later in the first round, named Patrick Bailey, and he's the guy right now. He's taken over the catching position. He's a rookie. He's I think he may have been drafted in the COVID year. So I don't even think he had a real college season in his last year. And then you have another prospect, Luis Matos, who was very high in the Giants prospect list, but then last year had a terrible year. And so he fell off of all of the prospect list. And now he's up and he's playing every day. So that's really what's fun about this team is you have this mix of vets who will not be here for very long, and these young players. It's like when you have a prospect and they finally break through and they're not a dud. That's like the best thing for fans because you kind of been following them through all of the minors and such too. So that's really what's carrying this fan base right now, and what's keeping the fan base really super optimistic. I mean, they're playing good baseball, but it's that other piece of we have somebody to root for. Finally, we can buy a jersey, because we're not. You can't. Who's going to buy a Conforto jersey knowing that he's going to be gone next year, right? You can't really do it for the fans. So that's really what the fans are super excited about right now.
You guys might be in the second toughest division. I was just looking.
Yeah,
Arizona D-backs are hot this year.
The interesting thing about the Diamondbacks, and I didn't learn about this stat until recently, is they have a really good schedule against the teams that are under 500. And so some of it is sort of just luck of the schedule, who you've been playing so far. So they may come down a little bit, but they still have a good amount of talent. Obviously, the Dodgers are going to, if I was to guess what the standings would look like by the end of this season, I would guess that the Giants are going to be in the same place that they currently are, which is second place, and that the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks would flip-flop. The Dodgers, they've had some injury bad injury luck. They've had issues with, people who they were depending on who just have not. And Walker Buehler hasn't even pitched this year, I don't think. So I think by this time, 2 months from now, the division will be flipped. But I still think the Giants, Diamondbacks, they will still be fighting for the wild card as well. But yeah, there's a lot of dog meat teams in the National League. You look at the Central, like the Reds won 12 games in a row or something like that.
Yeah,
and they still have a negative run differential. And it's funny. The only team in the NL Central that has a positive run differential is the Cubs, and they're under 500. So that just kind of shows you, if you look at all of the National League, I think you have one great team. That is the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah.
And then I think you may have the 3 next best teams might be in the NL West: Dodgers, Giants, and Diamondbacks. So that's kind of what they're fighting against. But for you guys, go back to the Blue Jays before we check out of here. You guys are going to be fighting, like I said, fighting for that wild card. But really, NL Central, dog meat. And, I would say the AL West is really solid, but solid to the point of where the team that wins the AL West might not even be the 3rd best team in the American League. Like that's really it could be 2 of the best teams might be in the American League East before you even get to a team in another division. So there's some very intriguing stuff going on. And so the last question I want to ask you was, what do you think about the more even schedule that we have now, where you are not playing the Yankees 22 times or whatever it was? You're probably playing them like 15 times. And the Giants as well. Giants don't have to play the Dodgers, all of those times, and then get beat up by the Dodgers and then have to try and make up those wins somewhere else. It's more favorable, I think, to middle of the pack teams to do well when you have the scheduling like this.
Yeah, it's obviously worked out really well for the Blue Jays to not have to play that many those teams as many times this year. And if they make the playoffs, I mean, that'll probably be the reason why, because I mentioned earlier the record against the AL East, and if they were playing as many times as they have in the previous years with 19 times, they might be under 500.
Yeah.
So, I think that works out really well for them. Their schedule's been tougher in the first half, and I think it eases up in the second half. And the opposite's true for the Rays. They seem to play the Royals like every weekend. I don't know exactly how that works, but every time I look, the Rays are playing somebody that sucks, and the Jays are playing somebody that's leading their division or in the playoffs. So hopefully that churns around. But yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic for the second half. Everyone brings up the fact that their record right now is better than it was in 2016 when they made it to the AL Championship Series. So kind of hanging our hat on that and just hoping for the best. And hopefully this weekend against Oakland turn things around offensively, and we're going to have a good series. I'd apologize for the noise in the background.
No, yeah, I'll let you get back to your family. But thanks for doing this. Brad and I don't often get a chance to talk to folks who follow other teams. So with Brad being out this week, gave me the opportunity, and you had kind of hit me up, and I was like, oh yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Like, let's do it. So thank you, Paul, for doing this. And that'll be it from here. So for all of the folks who helped me on this episode, I am Double G. We'll see you when we see you. Peace out.